Hi, my name is Chris Dixon. I'm the co-founder of Hunch and Founder Collective. This is Founder Stories. Today we have Kevin Ryan, the CEO and founder of Gilt Group, the founder of 10gen, and the former CEO of DoubleClick. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you have a really interesting background. Maybe we can start by talking about DoubleClick.
Sure.
So you were there from the very beginning, basically?
Yeah. Yeah, I joined, we had about 15 employees in 1996. So a very small team. And then we built it up 4 years later, had 2,000 employees in 25 countries. Then we went through the bad part of the internet, where it shrunk down to 1,000 people, and then became very profitable, and then ultimately was sold for $3 billion to Google.
And so when that started, was that sort of like, was it just sort of this radical idea that you would do advertising on the internet? I mean, it was basically one of the first companies to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and the key innovation, which everyone takes for granted now, was the fact that it was dynamic ad targeting, so that you could get a different ad than the person who sits next to you.
I see. So no one had done that before.
No, and so that was the real change and made it different from TV and radio and everything else. And now ultimately everyone does that now. But I think DoubleClick ultimately had the best piece of ad targeting software and a good infrastructure to support it.
Yeah, and so did you initially have, I think there's a lot of confusion here, you initially had a media business, but eventually sold it off, and then we're strictly a ad targeting technology company?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we originally had an ad serving tool. It was a technology company started by really Dwight Merriman and Kevin O'Connor, who had engineering backgrounds. Then the question is, what's the best business model for that tool? And so one of the first things was to start an ad network, to use that tool. And then secondly, about 6 months later, actually the Wall Street Journal came to us and said, we don't really want to be part of that, but we'd love to use your tool.
So they wanted to sell their ads directly?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we thought about it, and it's actually a decision that influenced the company dramatically, and said, yeah, let's try that. And then over time realized that that business was going to be much more profitable than the original business. And so we made a difficult transition, especially as a public company, where we ended up selling off the business that was 90% of our revenues when we went public.
Wow.
To focus on that, which ultimately is why the company became so successful.
And so you took a huge hit in revenue when you did that, and then
Enormous.
And then eventually, so I mean, that must have been an incredibly hard decision.
Yeah, it's a very ugly decision. And if it hadn't been for the downturn, where it almost forces you to make more difficult decisions, I'm not sure we would have made it as soon. But it actually, I'm not sure it saved the company, but it really resulted in the company's
success. And you guys
success.
were really kind of, DoubleClick was kind of a poster boy for kind of riding the upswing and downswing of the market.
Yes.
And that, I mean, that must have been interesting and also kind of brutal.
It was, and because we were a B2B player, our fortunes were tied to how all the 10,000 websites were doing out there.
I see. So you're particularly sensitive to the downturn.
Particularly sensitive. So when you are all doing great and all getting funded, then we were doing great. And then all of a sudden, what happened during a 2.5-year period is that we lost 70% of our clients.
Wow.
Bankrupt.
Yeah.
And the only thing that saved us is we probably lost 80% of our competitors. And so as a result, we made it through that with the largest market share, much leaner company, fewer competitors, and a really lean operating structure, which made us ultimately, we had 35% profit margins.
It turned out, I think, like that the downturn in the ad market created a really interesting period of innovation, I think, right? Like it wasn't like 2001 to 5 is sort of when you saw the things move from like just CPM to CPC and all these sorts of, affiliate networks, and people just were forced, I think, to be creative because people weren't just sort of throwing dollars at your CPM advertising anymore, right?
And luckily, the one thing that always made me feel good during that period is that the core usage, the core number of impressions, the core people going to the internet, all of that kept going up. So what we had was the drop in ad serving prices, which hurt us, and people going out of business. But underlying that, you could see that the core strength was there.
Yeah.
So I never had any doubts during that entire time, even as I was doing my 7th round of layoffs, where we had ultimately got rid of 1,000 people. Yeah. I didn't have any doubts that this was going to work, that the company was going to be successful, that internet advertising was going to be successful.
Yeah. And then so you guys eventually, you took it private. I guess normally people do that when they think the stock's undervalued, or you think that maybe being public just is, just being public was encumbering?
So ours was different. In our case, we had a fantastic board. Through 9 years, we never had a vote. And at the end, they felt like the company was undervalued, and actually the founders didn't think it was the right time to sell. And we were outvoted in that, and they sold the company. And it was at a premium to the public market. So in theory, the public market's always right.
Yeah.
So we got a 50% premium, which you'd say sounds great. And then the company 2.5 years later was sold for $3 billion. Not because it did so much better than that time, everyone went up.
Yeah.
We could see, which I don't think everyone could see, was that you had companies that, MySpace, AOL, all these things that were actually growing very quickly and were clients of ours, that were going to, increase revenues and turn the revenues for the first time dramatically. So all the B2B players, Akamai, DoubleClick, 24/7, all of them grew in value tremendously between 2005 and 2007.
Yeah.
So 2005, in retrospect, not always easy to see, was too early to sell.
Interesting. And so you left after 2005. And
when we put the company up for sale, Kevin, Dwight, and I all announced as part of the process that regardless of who it was sold to, we were going to do something else.
Okay. And then, so what did you do then in between? So you started AliCorp, which was
so
2009.
So Dwight and I then, even before the sale had been completed, started two companies.
Okay.
While we were at DoubleClick, early stages, not competitive. So we knew what we wanted to do.
What were those companies?
So that was ShopWiki and Panther Express.
Okay. And Panther was sort of a
competitor to Akamai, a CDN.
Okay.
And so we were two engineers apiece, but started building those products in those two companies. We started two companies that year. Then probably two companies the next year and two companies the year after that.
And those two, ShopWiki and Panther Express, you've since sold?
Yes. One a year ago, one a year and a half ago.
And what was the thesis with Panther Express? Just that there was a new way to do CDNs? Or?
Yeah. That CDNs are really the same thing as ad serving, when you step back. So we had a lot of experience in that area, a lot of relationships.
I see.
So we created a very good product. After 2 years, had $15 million in revenue and 400 clients, which is one of the fastest growing CDNs ever. But ultimately, we felt like there were a lot of players out there. We were better off selling it and focusing on other businesses.
Yeah, the CDN market, like Akamai was, another one of those companies that went way up, way down, and then now has become a great company.
Enormously valuable.
And then you started 10Gen and Gilt, or
10Gen, Gilt, and Business Insider.
Okay, and that was all through this entity, or I guess structure or something called AliCorp. Is that right?
Yeah. So what I did is I set up. We wanted to set up more than one company, partly from a diversification point of view, partly from an intellectual interest point of view. But I didn't want to set up too many companies. It wasn't like an angel investing where you invest in 100 things. We really wanted to focus. So each year, between the two of us, we could set up one or two companies. I was generally the CEO for the first 6 months. Really get it off the ground, hire the team, make sure I felt comfortable, and at a certain point hire a CEO, and then move to chairman. So by 2008, then I was chairman of all 6 companies. We were all in one space, independent companies. We shared some back-end things, so IT, office space, finance, things like that. We shared that to get it off the ground, which is a big hassle when you're starting a company. I mean, you can end up spending a lot of time on it. And if that can be taken care of, it helps you focus on the core. I
think it's interesting because I think that there's a sort of a fantasy of successful entrepreneurs to go and like, I'm going to start 6 things now. And I think what they often find is they end up having to run the ones to be successful. They sort of, they imagine they're going to start it and then just pass it off. Yeah. But it turns out that if they're not doing it full time, they don't make it work. But you seem to have done this quite successfully. And
so look, it's so far worked out really well. We had 2 companies that did pretty well, so we made money on those. We have 3 companies that I think are going to do extraordinarily well. And so I'm running one, Dwight's running one, and Henry Blodgett is running one, and they're doing great.